Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on systems and supports for reentry and beyond. My name is Alicia Zeman, and I am the PBIS coordinator at the West Virginia Behavior Mental Health Technical Assistance Center. And I'm here with Erin Day. She's our behavior support specialist for the North. And we're going to bring you this conversation about reentry and some foundational things to think about, but also some strategies that we want you to have. Of course, we have to share with you that we are a collaboration between the West Virginia Autism Training Center at Marshall University and the West Virginia Department of Education's Office of Special Education. These two entities have come together to form our TA Center, and the TA Center is the hub of school-wide PBIS, early childhood PBIS, and youth mental health first aid. But that's not all we do. We do lots of trainings on challenging behaviors, on trauma responsiveness, on FBAs and BIPs. If you name it in the world of education and it's around behavior or mental health, we probably have a training for that, or we can help you with that. And at the end, you'll see our emails. And if you need any support, can just reach out to us and we will join your meetings. We are currently virtual until at least November. So we will be meeting you on Teams or on Zoom. But please don't let the current context of what we are living in prevent you from reaching out for support for us. Today, we're going to talk to you about reentry. We're going to talk to you about going back to school after being out for 6 months. We're going to talk to you about the current context of living in a global pandemic, and we're going to talk to you about some best practices for teaching in remote instruction. A lot of our resources come from www.pbis.org. That's the National Center on PBIS's website. And they are putting really brief after brief out to support schools in this unique environment that we are currently working in. We've pulled information from these two briefs, returning to school during and after a crisis, and also creating a PBS behavior teaching matrix for remote instruction. These briefs are between, I would say, anywhere between 8 to 15 pages. They're made to be easy to read and for you to go in and pull out information that you need. We encourage you to go visit that site, look at the briefs they have up. If you would like to know more information about any of them, definitely reach out. We have been making presentation after presentation on their guidance. So if there's one that catches your attention and you'd like to know more, just let us know and we can help you with that. Today's objectives, just some background knowledge. Erin and I are both classroom teachers. We've both spent about a decade or more in the classrooms. Erin is just now coming out of the classroom this August. So she was teaching in a remote environment in the spring, the same as all of you. I've been out for a couple years, but that doesn't change who we are as people. And when we were thinking about being able to present this to you in this format, we realized that there is some challenges with that. It's hard to sit and listen to somebody to talk for an hour at a time or more. So what we've done is we've split this up into really two main objectives. We're going to talk about reentry and we're going to talk about teaching in the new normal. We encourage you to watch it in little bits. We encourage you to split it up. We encourage you to watch it as a team and do the activities that we have set up for you together. We're going to send some documents that are already made that we're going to talk about within this presentation. You can do those on your computer. You can do those, print those off and do that as a team together. Also, we are going to be sending a survey or a sign-in survey with this. If you would please fill that out, whether you are watching this as an individual or together as a team. It will ask you just for your name and what your title is at your school. That will allow us to count these videos as technical assistance, and that's great for our numbers so we can show how we're helping counties in this fall. So we're going to talk about reentry. We're going to talk about wrapping our heads around reentry practices, and social emotional learning. And then Erin's going to take over and she's really going to talk about teaching in this new normal, how we can think about expectations now, or how we can think about acknowledgements and incentives in the remote environment, and how we can support our students and our parents. I do encourage you to really start thinking, and I know you all have been back for a few days, and let's be honest, you've been thinking about reentry since you left. And I'm going to be honest with you, the TA Center has been thinking about supporting your reentry since you left. We've had these conversations since March 16th. School was called off indefinitely on March 13th. We came back to work that next week and set out what do we need to have in place to support schools when they need us. And through that, we've had many conversations with representatives from the National Center. We've been reading briefs. We've been attending webinars. We've been doing all of this stuff so we can be ready to have this conversation with you. And so it really begins about how can we wrap our heads around reentry in a healthy manner. And what do I mean by that? So the conversation actually begins with, where do we even start with reentry? Where do we even start um, in doing education in a brand new way, essentially? The TA Center, if you have spent any time with us, which I know most of you have, we talk a lot about making sure that we don't get stuck in admiring our problems and that we always want to be working towards solving problems. We, as humans, and especially with our Appalachian culture, we have a tendency to really get stuck in these are all the problems I have. Let me list them for you. And then you take your turn and you list all your problems and concerns. And then the conversation stops there. So within the TA Center, what we're always challenging each other to do, and what we're always challenging our schools to do, is to go to that next step of, okay, these problems exist. What are we going to do to solve them? Or how do we work through our worries towards finding a solution? And what we're going to encourage you to do this year, and what really I think might be a best practice that we can continue to do throughout the years to come, is to really start thinking about how can we worry effectively. And those are ideas about making sure that we're identifying what the worry or problem is, really identifying what do we already do well for this, what needs to be decided now, and what's next, or what do we need to plan for in the future. And I think that second bullet is so important. We've always worried about our kids. We've always worried about our staffs. We've always worried about education in general. And we're always pushing forward to do better or to solve the problems that we see. So this isn't new. The context is new. The challenge is new. But this idea of worrying about the work that we do and the people that we work with is not new. And so what we have to do is to have that ability to identify what we've already always done well. So we have always had kids who had food insecurity, and we've made plans. I've been all over this state. I go into schools, and very rarely do I walk into a school that they don't say, let me show you my food pantry, or let me tell you about the program that the church down the road runs so we can make sure our kids have food. We've always done that well. We have faced challenges before that we have had to think about how we are going to serve the students who are coming in and their parents. So this isn't new. It feels new. It feels different because we've never had exactly this, but we always go through this process. But the first activity we want to share with you is really just this Word document. You can print it off, or you can do it on your computer. But what we really want you to do is just to take a few minutes to process. And we're going to talk about the importance of processing in future slides. But we want you to take the time to really write down, what are the problems you're worried about? What do you already do well for this problem? Because I guarantee you that you probably have something in your toolbox. And then thinking about what needs to be decided right now. What do I need to do to be successful? And what might be next? And what do I need to be prepared for? So an example that Aaron had written out on this is the problem is simply kids have been out of school since March. That's a long time. That's about 6 months that they've been out of our environment. That's not any information that you didn't know. That's not stellar new information that Lisha's telling you, but we know that they've been out of school since March. So what do we already do well for that? Well, we already know that they leave us for the summer. We recognize that the summer slide is a real issue, but we do know how to bring kids in and build classroom communities with them. We have that basic foundational knowledge, and that's a skill and a tool that we have in our toolkit. We need to be able to identify what needs to be done right now before they enter our remote environment, before they enter our classroom. So we really need to know the immediate needs that these kids have walking into our school, and having some forethought about what might be next. Okay, so I need to know the immediate needs of my kids walking in the school, but I also need to know what I'm going to do about those needs when I find out about them. So, what resources to make them available. So, what we're going to encourage you to do is, and we're going to do this a couple of times throughout this presentation, we're going to encourage you to pause this video and to work through these activities and these thoughts. Take as long as you need. When you're ready, come back and push play, and we'll be ready to move on to the next slide for you. So, go ahead and do that. Press pause, and when you come back, we'll be ready to go on to the next slide. So we're going to talk more about where do we even start. And what we are going to continue to say is be cautious about just being stuck in admiring the problems. And we're going to give you some roadblocks that might get in your way when we're talking about where we might get stuck. The first one we want to caution you about is the idea of too much of a good thing is still too much, or that you can drown in help. So, everybody think back to March. I'm not sure if it happened to your email boxes, but it definitely happened to our inboxes. Things shut down nationwide and even worldwide. And then all of a sudden, our inboxes got filled with come attend this webinar. Here are these free resources. We're allowing this, platform to be free for you for 6 months. Please sign up. Here are 20 webinars that you can attend in the next 12 hours. Come get all the information that we have. And at some point, it began to feel like we were drowning. We wanted that information. We felt it was important that we got that information so we could share it with all of you. But we were all dealing with our life had changed. Everybody was home. We were scared to go to the grocery store. Everything was different. So the idea of too much of a good thing is still too much can be the same for our parents, can be same for the staff, and can be the same for our students. So really thinking about how much we're sharing and how much we are putting on them. And we're going to encourage you to concentrate on the basics, right? And right now, the basics is processing. Our kids and our staff and our parents need a chance to process what has happened and what has changed. And I know that I can imagine that if we were in a room together, some of you would be like, not a counselor, not my job. But I'm going to tell you that it doesn't have to be on a counselor level. Our kids need to talk. They need a chance to say to each other, hey, I really missed you. Man, things really changed. Or, man, these masks drive me crazy. Or they need a chance to say, I don't like how the lunchroom feels right now. And they have to have the ability to have that voice and to recognize that things are different. But when we're having those conversations, we always need to be guiding them and your staff, if you're an administrator, if you're having those processing conversations, we need to be guiding them into the next conversation of, okay, that's a problem. Now what? Or, yes, I hear your concern. This is hard. What are we going to do about that next? And those are two places to really start when we talk about how we're going to move forward from where we've been to where we need to go. Another roadblock that we want to caution you about is to try to make up for lost time. So we are all educators. We are driven by the need to teach kids our standards and to get them to where they need to be. And we want to caution you, and I'm going to say this strongly. We're not going to be able to get back the lost time. We did the best we could. In fact, I will sing your praises until the end of my career and even beyond that. The ability of West Virginia educators to take education the way it's always has been and to switch it into remote learning in a weekend or a week at the most is phenomenal. And I will tell you, I've been in national conversations where states took a lot longer to be able to have that turnaround. And you all just stepped up to the challenge and you managed to do that. But we all know that I feel that we probably all strongly agree that face-to-face is the best. The way that we used to do it is the way that we think students benefit and have the most positive outcomes. But at this point in time, we can't get back what we've lost. And so we want to caution you against making the cake mistake. And what does that mean? This is actually the idea of Dr. Jim Harris, and he shared that with us in a TA Center meeting, and we were all like, that's the perfect example. And what he is telling us is we have a recipe for a cake, whether it's a box cake or you're going to make a fancy cake. And the recipe says that we have to cook this cake for 45 minutes at 350 degrees. But we're in the middle of this recipe and we realize that we don't have 45 minutes. We can't change the recipe and turn up the temperature to 650 degrees and expect to have the same outcomes if we cook it for 20 minutes. We're going to end up with a burnt cake. And we need you to realize that that's the same thing that's going to happen with our kids. If they come back, we don't take the time to process. We don't take the time to reconnect and form relationships. We don't take the time to teach them the expectations of what school looks like now. And we begin to push to make up for lost time. We're going to burn up our relationships and we're going to burn up their incentive to reach the standards that we need them to reach. So what we have to do is what we've always done. It's just we're going to do it on a grander level now. Every year you've had kids come in that haven't been on level, that haven't been where you needed them to be, and you take a deep breath and you say this is going to be a challenge, and you do your diagnostics to figure out where they're at, and then you make a plan to get them to where they need to be. We're going to do that on a much grander level now, but that's what we're going to do. We're going to take who comes into our classrooms. We're going to build relationships with them. We're going to reconnect. We're going to make safety a priority. We're going to make expectations a priority. And then we're going to see where they're at and we're going to scaffold them to the next level of where they need to be. But we can't do that with the idea of we have to make up for everything that we lost. We have to do it with the idea of this is where we're at now. And these are the next steps that we're going to take. Another thing that we need to keep in mind so it doesn't become a roadblock is thinking about who needs to hear what. And I think this is another one that I feel really strongly about. There's so much information right now that we have to realize that the information that we share, the people who are hearing it are either going to use it to learn or they're going to use it to act. We need to be really good about who needs to know about how we're sharing the information. When we're sharing it, are we processing, are we teaching, or are we just complaining? And that the goal should always be to process towards problem solving. And that's with everything I'm talking about is coming from the view of the three stakeholders that we have in schools right now, for your students, for your staff, and for your parents. And I'm really going to caution you, and I'm really going to say this strongly. This is not the time for our kids to hear our parents argue. And by parents, I mean teachers. If kids hear your negative conversations, things like, we shouldn't be here, this is a horrible idea, this isn't safe, what we're doing in those environments is that you're giving them information that they don't know how to process, which leads to more worry and anxiety on your students. Now, I'm not saying that if you're concerned that you should keep that to yourself. No, you need to have those conversations with your administration. You need to have those conversations with your staff peers. You need to be having those conversations among each other, but those are adult conversations that need to be happening among adults. And when we're with our kids, we need to be as honest as we can be, but we need to make sure that our fear isn't guiding the conversations that we're having with our students. This is a hard enough time as it is, and what they need us to do is to lead them in a mature manner that lets them know that, yes, I hear your concern. I'm going to have those conversations in the professional manner that is appropriate for the concerns that we're talking about. But it's going to be hard. We're going to talk about how we're going to be dysregulated, or we're already dysregulated. And so this is something that we need to keep in mind as we are having the chance to be face to face with our students. So those were some roadblocks that we wanted to tell you about, but now we're going to talk about where do we even start and how can we focus on solving those problems. And it really starts with the center quote, anxiety is contagious, but so is calm. And we're going to talk about how we can insert some more calm into our PBI's programming and how we can insert some more calm into our schools and our remote learning. And it starts with this. It starts with leadership and it starts with confidence in your plan. So calm is contagious, just like chaos is too. And what we mean by confidence is knowing your plan. So I know it's hard to know the plan right now. I can even tell you as a parent sitting here, it's hard to have confidence in knowing the plan because the plan isn't always consistent and clear at this moment. But we encourage you to get clarification when you need. Plan thoughtfully for the scenarios that you think is going to come your way and utilize the resources and the tools in your toolbox that you already have. And the reason why having confidence and knowing your plan is so important is because it will allow you to hold frame when things are going wrong. Because inevitably, pre COVID, things went wrong. And I'm going to guarantee you right now, things are going to go wrong. And I'm thinking about, the first time you come up against a student who doesn't want to keep their mask on, what's the response going to be? The first time you come up against a parent who's really dysregulated because they don't know how to use the technology, what's your response going to be? And that comes down to even having the idea of maybe as a staff or a PBIS team, you write out scripts. The first time I come up against this problem, these are the talking points that I'm going to use. And this is the flow chart that I'm going to follow. So first I'm going to ask the kid to put the mask back, the student, Tommy, whatever you want to call him. I'm going to ask Tommy to put his name or his mask back on. If he still refuses, I'm going to ask him to come into my room to have a private conversation. And then working through that as what your policies in your county state, but also what is appropriate for your school and the discipline systems that you built. But our staff is going to need to know how to hold frame in those difficult situations because that's going to lessen the anxiety for um, for your students. It's also going to lessen the anxiety for your staff if we have an idea of how we're going to handle that. Remote learning, the first time a kid won't turn on their camera or a student won't respond to a question, or if we can't get a hold of them, what is our script and what are we going to do to hold frame in those situations? And then we talk about this all the time to the point where it really has become like a personal mantra, at least for me. This idea of we can't control everything, but we can control the controllables. Anxiety often comes from not knowing uh, how things are going to turn out or things not fitting into the plan as they've always fit. And one of the ways that you can calm anxiety is really concentrating on the things that you have control over in this moment. So right now, I don't have a control over what school's going to look like in my county. I don't really have control over COVID numbers in the state, but I do have control over that I'm going to give you the best presentation I can at this moment. And that idea really becomes a mantra and something that you can hold on to. And when you start looking for things that you actually have control over, what you'll find is that you have a lot more control than you think you do. And some of the things that we know that we have control over is number one, we have the ability to understand the social emotional needs of kids and staff and parents that we're dealing with. And we have this foundational knowledge that stressed and traumatized brains function differently. Now, this is being recorded for a county that I know that I've been in and that I've had this conversation with multiple times. If these points are ones that you're not familiar with, please reach out to us. We love to talk about um, how brains function. We love to talk about how that affects what the classrooms look like. But when it comes to this presentation, what we need you to remember is nobody's coming back into the school year in the same state that they were pre-March 13th, right? We're all coming back with different stress levels. There's a good possibility that there's a certain amount of students and even staff that are coming back with maybe more trauma or toxic stress than they left with. And those are some in-depth conversations that we have, but we have to remember when brains are stressed or traumatized, they function and respond differently. They're less rational. They are less receptive to language. It's more emotional. It's a quicker trigger. Those kind of things are what everybody's walking back to school with. And what we know is that we have that foundational knowledge that stress and traumatized brains function differently, but we also understand this and have strategies that we know how to use to respond to that. So if this is something that now you're writing notes on or something that you're thinking about and you want to know more about, please let Aaron and I know. and we will gladly bring a presentation or more resources to you about that. But that's the first thing that we know, is that if Dr. Dan Siegel says, if you can name it, that you can tame it. One of the things that we're going to have to name is that a lot of individuals, or I'm even going to say all of us, are coming back in a different state than before. And therefore, we might be reacting differently, or our stress levels are different, or what we might have used to been able to tolerate is not at the same level as before. And then what strategies can we use when we recognize that a brain is functioning different than what it has in the past? The second thing that we can control is something that we've always controlled, and that's the external systems. That's what PBIS is. So that's developing expectations, teaching the expectations, developing rules and routines, looking at the data to see if it's working. That's having acknowledgement systems. Those are external systems that we're referring to, and you're going to see it in the future slides. But when we can focus on those external systems and make them really strong, we're going to decrease regulatory fatigue. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the future. And we're going to increase the capacity for our students and our staff and our parents to be regulated. And we do that by building really strong external systems. We also know that we can solve some of these, or a lot of these problems, through the lens of a multi-tiered system of support. And we can do that because a multi-tiered system of support, specifically PBIS, is based upon good teams that solve problems. And it's that simple. See, I'm an educator. I know it's not actually simple, but it's that idea of we identify a problem, we make a plan about how we're going to respond to it, we put that plan into action, and then we see if it's working or not. And that's what good teams do. They identify the problem and they work through that system. And then if it didn't work, they do it again. What happens when you don't have strong teams is that's when a lot of the finger pointing comes in, the parents fighting in front of the kids come in. That's when you hear things like, I told you that wouldn't work, or I can't believe we let her be in charge of that. And that's when things start to go off the rails. So because you already implement PBIS, or because you're familiar with a multi-tiered system of support and you have a team in place, you're more likely to be able to solve problems more efficiently. Also, we know that the basis of PBIS and the work that we do in our particular multi-tiered system of support is really at a base level about nurturing and responsive relationships. And so we encourage you more now than ever to be really intentional in practices to make connection, or to reconnect with your students and with your parents. And then what a multi-tiered system of support does is it helps you identify the expectations you need to have in place. And they're probably going to have to be tweaked for this year. Not probably, they just are going to have to be tweaked for this year. And then the teaching systems that go with that. So what does it mean to be successful in this new environment? Nobody knows how to go to school in a global pandemic. Your pre-Kers don't know. I'm a pre-K teacher. I'm going to tell you that pre-Kers don't come to school knowing how to go to school. I'm going to tell you that your seniors, your eighth graders, your sixth graders, your third graders don't know how to come to school in a remote environment or in person to be successful in the current context that we're in. And I'll take it a step farther. I'm going to guess you as administrators and teachers don't know how to do this either. And I'm going to give you a little secret. We're learning as we go too, right? Because none of us have done that before. So we're really going to have to evaluate, what does it mean to be successful now? And how are we going to teach our stakeholders how to do that in the current environment? So some reentry practices to think about. This is from that national brief about returning to school during and after a crisis. And it really, the thing I love about this brief, I know I sound really nerdy saying that, but that's okay. The thing I really love about this brief is that it talks about going back to basics. Do what works and do it well. And that's what is really the basic essential core features of PBIS. That's what we're encouraging you to concentrate on. We're not saying bring in new systems. We're not saying bring in new curriculum. We're not saying any of that. We're saying go back to the basics and make sure that we're doing it well. And this is the continuum that they talk about doing. The first step is to connect or to reconnect with your students and with your parents. And then the second step is to screen, and that's screening the students' social, emotional, behavioral, and academic growth. No, I think this national brief refers more to universal screeners, but most of the counties that we work in and in the state of West Virginia have not already established a process for universal screeners. So that's not what we're going to suggest for you. But we're going to suggest for you a more informal process that we'll talk more about. And then supporting what you find in that screening, teaching, like we just talked about, how to be successful in the current environment, and then to monitor how you're doing. And when we go through this continuum, the whole goal is to have a positive, predictable, and safe learning environment. We know base level pre COVID and during COVID and after COVID, children have the most positive outcomes when they're in positive, predictable, and safe learning environments. And we know research tells us one of the best ways to make positive, predictable, and safe learning environments is to use PBIS. So we're going to break that down a little bit. The first step was to connect. So we have to either A, reconnect, or B, enhance our relationships that we've already had in place. Um, and that's a challenge. It's a challenge because we have to do it differently than we've ever done it before, either in the remote environment or even in the brick and mortar. It won't look the same. We have to find ways to effectively communicate. And if you go back to those slides where I was saying too much of a good thing is still too much, this is an example, and really drilling down in how is the best way to effectively communicate with your school and with your stakeholders in your school. Because I give the example of prior to coronavirus, right? There was a snow day. In my house, I would get a phone call. My husband would get a phone call. I would get two texts. He would get a text. We would get an email. Then I'm in a group text with my teacher friends from my county, and we would tell each other. And then you go on social media, and then about 75 other people would tell you that there's no school the next day. Okay, not exactly effective communication, and too much of a good thing is too much, right? Because by the time I got to the 75 people on social media, I'm like, I get it. It's not exciting anymore. We know that there's no school. We have to be careful not to overwhelm our parents with that, right? So, more ways to get a hold of them is not necessarily the best. What is the most effective way to communicate? And where is the one place they can go to get the information that they need? We also encourage you to check in daily. This is something that we talk about, but it's also being supported by the Department of Education, making sure that we have, if you can't check in daily, that you're at least checking in weekly, that they're having access to one caring adult during their whole time in their schooling. And then having the ability to identify supports when they need. So we were in a training yesterday, and what we're talking about is that, we have an idea, especially if you've been a functioning PBIS school for a while, you have an idea of the kids who need tier 2 and tier 3 supports in different areas of their life. But we can't put blinders on and think it's only those kids who are going to need additional support. We're going to have kids that we never saw coming. We're going to have kids that we never would have thought that they needed additional support. We're going to have kids who, you know, were always easy breezy and now are having some difficulties. And we need to be ready to identify that and get them the supports that they need when they show that to us. And one of the ways that we're going to find those kids is to screen them. And what we're going to encourage you to do is to find Johnny before Johnny finds you. We want you to have the ability to have the conversations with your parents and with your students to find out what's going on in their lives, what has been going on in their lives for the last 6 months before they walk into your school and have a meltdown, whatever a meltdown looks like for that child. We want you to have the ability to have some proactive conversations so you can really begin to think about what do we need to have in place for school when our kids come through our doors, right? And that's along the lines of who has had food insecurity, whose parents have lost jobs, who hasn't left their parents for the last 6 months. My little guy, I guarantee you he's going to have some separation anxiety because he's not been without us. For that amount of time. Or, you're going to have some kids who are going to be really worried about germs. You're going to have some kids who are really worried about contracting the virus, and maybe they know somebody who had that and it wasn't, they were filled with that worry for that time. And maybe you're going to have some students who have lost people that they love. And the more information that we can have before they walk through the door, the more you're going to be able to have interventions and supports into place to support them when they get there. And when I say door, I mean remote door, or I mean a brick and mortar building. And when you begin to have these kind of informal screening conversations, you begin to find what are the needs of your students as a whole. So we always operate in, we, as an Aaron and I in the TA Center, operate in this idea of the pyramid, right? That we have supports for all, we have supports for few, and or for some, and then we have supports for few. I'm really going to take a guess and a hypothesis that you are going to have to scale out some of your tier 2 interventions and supports that you have in place, that more kids are going to need them, or we're going to have to make some tier 2 interventions and supports available for all. And we're going to have to push those down. Just for an example, we were talking in as a TA center, like, we might have a tier 2 intervention group where the kids do process things that have happened in their life, and they do have an opportunity to talk about their life. And what we might have to do is get really good about scaling that out for everybody. So having ability to have a class intervention or a class discussion about things have changed, right? So that's something that we might have used as a small group in tier 2 that we're going to have to get skilled at being able to push that out for everybody. But you're also going to have to be thinking about what are your needs as an administration, your needs as staff. We have a school that we recently did a training with, that before we did the training, the counselor pushed out a survey to the staff and asked things like, what are you worried about? What are your protective factors? What are the good things in your life right now that are keeping you sane? Do you feel supported? If not, what would make you feel supported? And it was their opportunity to share. And what it allowed that counselor to do was almost to tier her staff, right? So this group of teachers are really struggling and they need additional support from me and from the administration. This group is ready to rock it, and maybe they can provide support for the ones who are really struggling right now. So what we're talking about really comes across for all 3 stakeholders, right? Parents, students, and staff. We need to be screening for where they're at as well. So this is an activity. It doesn't come with necessarily a worksheet, but you can take a piece of paper. I'll tell you, we did this training live. So we were virtual and they were all together. They had one of the big post-it notes. All the staff had little post-it notes, and they would write down the answers to these questions and they put it together. So what information do you want or need to know as you move into the school year? What do you want to know about your families? What do you want to know about your students, what they've been through, what they've been doing? I heard Dr. Jim Harris do a presentation, and he said, we're going to have kids who are going to come back who have been in very traumatic situations, but we're also going to have some kids who are going to really struggle because they've been playing Fortnite for 12 hours a day, and now they have to come back into structure, right? That's probably informal information that we need to know too. Like, that they might be having some regression because of what they've been doing for the past 6 months. So take a moment to write down some questions that you can ask your kids and their families, and then as a team or as a staff. And if you're not working together, even thinking individually for your classroom, consider some ways you can collect that data. So what the school that we did the training with did before is they had that post-it note, and then I believe the counselor was taking those and they made an online form. So when they were calling their parents to say, hey, you're in my class this year, these are the things you need to know, they were informally asking these questions and filling it in the survey so they could have a whole picture of the data of their school and what they needed to do to move forward. So if you're interested in doing this, you can go ahead and set that up and do it for yourself or do it together, and then come back to this presentation when you're ready. So once you've screened them, what we encourage you to do is to think about how you're going to support what you know. And this is the one that we know how to do this already. We know how to establish a safe environment on school and online. And when I say safe, I'm not so much talking about the guidelines for how to prevent COVID in your schools. That's brand new, but safe as in how to make a safe, predictable environment. And we do that by teaching and prompting and acknowledging. And we do that by teaching, prompting, and acknowledging routines, expectations, and behaviors that we know that we want to see. The challenge now is that we have to bridge those expectations across settings. I know that many counties are going to have a hybrid model. So being able to take your expectations, let's say they're safe, responsible, and respectful. How does that look in school? How does that look in the classroom? How does that look online? How does that look on the bus now? And we have more examples of that coming up for you. And then we have to take the time to teach. We have to teach these new critical skills that's going to keep everyone safe. We absolutely 100% have to be better than ever at engaging students, and more creative than ever about engaging students. We know that this is where the rubber meets the road for us, right? We know to get the best positive behavioral outcomes, we have to engage students. But it's common knowledge that to get the best academic outcomes, positive academic outcomes, it's to engage our students. So when we have engaging lessons, engagement opportunities, when students are having the opportunity to participate, we're going to meet the goals of both behavioral and academic for our students. And it's challenging. We were doing this training with another county that I haven't talked about yet, but that's what they ask us. How do you do that? What's the examples? And all those webinars I referred to earlier, there's a lot of webinars about how to have engaging lessons in remote learning, and what you need to do for success, or suggestions for what to do for success. So if you want more information, let us know, and we'll dig some of those out for you. We have to prompt and reinforce expectations, provide positive and supportive feedback as well. And then you have to monitor how it's going. That goes back to that good teaming and team problem solving process, right? How are our expectations for safety and health working? What are our kids telling us with their social, emotional, behavioral, and academic needs? Are we meeting that? Do we need to go back to the drawing board and make a new plan? Do we have students that we need to enhance supports for? How are we going to ID students who need more support over time? So that idea of tier two. Tier two are kids who need more practice with the expectations, more feedback from adults, and more positive adult relationships as well. And are we matching the intensity of monitoring to the intensity of need? So if things are feeling like chaos, we probably need to monitor our plans more often, right? But if you get into week 3 and you've gotten in a groove, then maybe you don't need to monitor every day. Maybe you need to look at it once a week or every other week. So that idea of, if things feel chaotic, let's be looking at it as a team and a problem solving approach more often. This is an example of some of the reentry practices and examples that they give in the national brief, the one that's about returning to schools. They're really good examples, and we encourage you to go check those out. If I remember, I will send them as well. But it gives examples for social, emotional, and behavioral growth, but also student learning as well. Okay, my last part, and then Aaron's up. So let's talk about social emotional learning. We always, not always, but I feel like social emotional learning has been a topic that we've talked a lot about in recent years, and a lot of times it revolves around the idea of what's the best curriculum to use, what social emotional skills do we need to teach. I'm going to encourage you to think about social emotional learning right now in a broader sense, with the idea of relationships and processing and regulation. And what I mean by that is really thinking about what intentional practices are you going to put in place to reconnect with your students and with your families, and thinking about like little details, like how are we going to reconnect with social distancing? So I was a teacher who loved to give hugs and high fives and fist bumps. A lot of that's not appropriate right now. So I know of a school who they developed a theme for this year, and they developed a hand signal that is going to be how they greet each other, and they're going to teach their students that in a video before they come back, so they're ready when they reach the door to have a way to that's their own kind of secret hello code for one another. Thinking about how are you teaching your kids to be successful in school now, with the knowledge of nobody knows how to be successful in school now until we teach them that. And then how will you set your environment up for that success? And then really thinking about what feedback and reinforcement are you going to give them when you see them doing what you've taught them? Because we know that feedback and reinforcement is really important to close that feedback loop. Like, right? We teach them something, they show us that they do it, we give them feedback. And when we give them that feedback, it encourages them to repeat that behavior again. This is going to be more important now than ever, because we're really retraining or reteaching what we spent years teaching them. So they're going to need to feedback to know when they get it right. And they need to have that ability to feel successful in this new environment. But probably the most important question is how can you be that one caring adult that many or really all of our students need? That's one of the big pushes that we've heard from the Department of Education is that all students need to have contact with one caring adult. And how are we going to make sure that that's happening for everyone and that we're not missing anyone? Because everybody has that need. I talked a little bit of processing earlier, but kids need time to process too. So, what kind of activities, what small group conversations can you lead to help them work through this? I give the example of my son was in third grade last year, and there came a time where I began to set up Zoom meetings with him and his friends because he was missing them and we couldn't be together. And that first Zoom meeting was, the first 10 or so minutes was really awkward because Zoom meetings are hard because you can see everybody and you're making eye contact with them and they're doing funny things and you're trying to figure out where they're at. And then it was also awkward because third grade conversations are always awkward because they're third graders. And then once they settled in, they began that first Zoom meeting was really interesting and insightful for me because they began to have conversations about, are you scared? Do you miss school? Do you think we'll go back? Do you know anybody that's sick? What's it like at your house? And they began to have peer-to-peer conversations. Now, my son had had those conversations with us about wearing a mask and about whether school's going back and that it's okay to feel scared right now, but we know the things we need to do to stay safe. He had had those conversations with us, but he needed to hear that from same age peers. And he needed to know that the people he cared about outside of our house were okay and that they were dealing with the situation in their own ways. And I think that's what I mean when I envision processing, just the ability and giving them the time to have those conversations and guiding them in ways that can ease their anxiety and the fear of their unknown to the best of our abilities. Um, and then thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and not letting that leave our thought processes, right? Like all of us need to have that need for safety. We need to have that need for connection. We need to have our needs met before we can work our way up and really do our best learning. So it's really about back to the basics, right? Relationships, expectations, and feedback. And then we really have to keep in mind that regulation is going to be different. So if you've spent time with us in our trainings, we talk about regulation a lot. Um, but I'm going to venture a guess that everybody who's walking back into your buildings and even probably entering your remote settings are a lot more dysregulated than we've been in the past. Nobody's coming back in that same state. I think I mentioned that earlier. And an example that in an activity that we have about that is to think about it this way. I want you to take a minute to think about your last trip to the grocery store. Okay. What things did you have to think about that weren't in your routine before March? Okay. So typically, when we have a live session, we're putting this in chat, but it's often things like, uh, where's my mask? Uh, why is this person so close to me? Which way am I supposed to go up and down the aisle? Um, am I maintaining my 6 foot different distance from other people? How many other people touched this mango before I before I touched it? So there's a lot of things that we are thinking differently than before. Um, and what you'll find, at least for myself, is that it takes a lot more out of me to go to the grocery store now, right? Where I used to be able to go and it was just an inconvenience in my day. Now it's much more stressful and I come home more depleted than I did in the past. And that is something that's called regulatory fatigue. So when you are out of your element or you're having to figure out how to do something you've always done in a new fashion, it's taking more of your resources. And the grocery store is a great example of that. So take a moment to think of yourself. If the grocery store for you in the past, where would you rank it for stressing you out? On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not stressed at all, 10 being the most stressed you've ever been. In the past, for me, it was probably maybe a 3 or a 4, right? Depending on how crowded it is and if they had the stuff that I needed and if I had remembered my list or not. All right. So now going and thinking about all those things that we just talked about, for me, going to the grocery store is probably a 7 or an 8. And if I go on a Sunday afternoon, it might even be a 9, because that's when everybody goes. And so I come home much more depleted. And when I come home more depleted, I'm not as able to solve problems. Things stress me out more. I'm more cranky with my family. Don't ask me to learn something when I come home depleted, and I have regulatory fatigue. So I want you to take that idea, and now I want you to think about your students walking back into the building for the first day of school, and everything is different, because it has to be, because we're trying to keep them safe. They're going to be more depleted. They're going to be more stressed. They're going to not be able to take in information as well as they once did. They might react bigger than they ever did before. You might see more tears than you ever did before. And you have some kids who are going to stroll in and it's not going to affect them in the least. And I hope that's the majority of your kids, that we have resilient kids, that that's who they're going to be. But we have to have this idea that they're going to be suffering from regular suffering. I don't know if suffering is the right verb for that, but they're going to be dealing with regulatory fatigue as well. And when we think about that, what I encourage you to think about is what things will be different or unfamiliar to them this year, and what can we proactively provide them for them to be successful. So maybe we need to provide them visuals of what things are going to look at. I know a lot of schools are doing virtual open houses. Maybe we need to send them some social stories about how to ride the bus now, or where they enter, or where they hang up their jacket, or when they need to wear a mask. Maybe it's just a one pager that is family friendly that they send home, and you encourage your parents to go over that with them. Um, Maybe it's little blurbs on social media that parents can get you can remind your parents to tell their students that, hey, this is going to be different. This is how we do this now, making it really family friendly. But what are those things that we can help prepare them so we can lessen the regulatory fatigue, so they can have more capacity to be successful? And that goes to that idea of, when your internal systems are overtaxed, your external systems need to be stronger. Everybody's going to be dysregulated. In the past, we would talk to you about how you have some students who are dysregulated, you have some teachers who are dysregulated, and really the premise of, when a student is dysregulated, they can't learn, and when a student or a teacher is dysregulated, they can't teach. And then we would give you strategies of how to bring everybody back to regulation. I'm going to encourage you just to assume that we're all going to be working in a state of dysregulation. And when that happens, the best response that we have, the best strategy that we have in our back pocket, is to have really strong external systems. And those are the external systems that we talked about earlier: expectations, rules, routines, all of those things brought thought about and being ready to be taught to them. We think about it in the terms of, think about the military. When somebody goes to boot camp, they get off the bus, and the military doesn't assume that they know how to be soldiers. They start from ground zero, and they teach you what is expected and how to be a soldier. And they teach you to the point where, when you are in a life-threatening situation or in a very dangerous situation, how many soldiers have you heard, or even have you heard say, my training took over and I knew what to do because of the training I had at boot camp, or the training? Now, that is a high level example. But that's the premise that we're talking about. The stronger our systems are, the more ready that you are to hold frame when things are difficult, the more success that you're going to have, and it's going to reduce anxiety for everyone. So we encourage you to take the time to ensure that your students are ready to support your systems are ready to support your students with things like visuals, that you've thought about your routines and expectations. And if what you thought doesn't work, that you go back and try again, and you teach them the new way that's going to work better. That you're having concise communication with students and families, and that you are being as open and as calm as you can in your relationships. And so that leads us to our conversation about the new normal. I was setting the foundation for some of the strategies and examples that Erin's going to share with you. And that was a quick overview. And this is a big mindset shift from how we've always done school. So I encourage you not to be frustrated. If you have any of those topics that we talked about earlier that you want to know more about, please reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you more. There's nothing, I'm going to be honest, that Erin and I love more than helping teams, and helping teams get through roadblocks in solving problems. So Erin's going to talk more about some specific strategies about what our teaching environments look like now.
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. She did a great job setting the stage for this next part of the presentation, and giving you that foundational information about how we're going to handle our students walking through the door into this new normal. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is thinking through expectations. So as a PBIS school, this is something you've already done or have worked through as a team and with your students and with your staff. But now we know we need to switch gears to this virtual world. So on this slide, I have a couple of examples for you. On the left is a remote learning matrix for an elementary school. And it talks about how to do things like entering the classroom online, or how you should be doing things during one-on-one instruction and following those expectations of being safe, respectful, and responsible. And on the right, you're going to see an example from an elementary school that we worked with last year, and the need was identified pretty immediately when we went virtual, that what we needed from our students and what we needed from ourselves and what we needed from parents was much different than what we were all used to. So those expectations were created specifically for remote learning. So what will teachers do? What was expected of teachers during that time? What would students do? And then what would parents do? Because we know that during remote learning, they're such a huge part of their children's education. And here's another example of a matrix geared towards secondary, middle, and high schools. So the same idea of taking those school-wide expectations and what does that look like during distance learning? What does that look like when you're handling technology? So the idea we've been talking about with the schools we've been training when we've been able to do it live is thinking through those expectations, those school-wide expectations, and how to merge your matrices that you have. So you have one already established for the brick and mortar building. Your students know what it looks like to be respectful in the hallway, or to be responsible in the lunchroom, or to be safe when they're on the bus. But we also know that as they're walking into the building this year, those expectations are going to probably look a whole lot different. You know, when they left in March, they left something that they knew, and they're coming back to a whole set of guidelines and expectations that are very unfamiliar to them. And they've probably been to public places with their families or their parents. And so they're kind of understanding the idea that things are a little different, but they don't know what that looks like in school. You know, they rode the bus home on March 13th, but now they're getting on it and you can only sit by yourself every other seat. Or when you're in the hallway, the water fountains are closed and you have to stand 6 feet apart from each other when you're waiting for the bathroom. So really being thoughtful and thinking through what are the expectations that you have for the current context, for the current situation that you're in. And how can we make those known? How can we teach those to our students? How can we share those with our families? And if you look at this example, we really like it because it takes the context and the setting and it applies it to the overarching expectations, regardless of what that is. So they are looking at places in the building, but they're also talking about what it looks like online when you're working in a group or working independently. And then at the bottom, you can see an example of some expectations that they have for their students, regardless of the setting and context. Whether you're in the building, whether you're online, these are things that we expect from you. So this is an activity that we did with a school that we trained, and it was a really awesome experience for them to take a moment to do what we just talked about. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to encourage you to pause this when I'm done explaining it, and either work with your team or write down a way that you can take this back to your team and do it at your school. So what we had them do was to look at their current expectations. They had a matrix, so we had it printed out for everyone. Or if you don't have that, to think about expectations that you do have in mind for your students. And then even though most of the teachers in that building had been there for a long time, we had them take a tour of the school. So they went around together and we could hear their conversation when they were in the lunchroom, because that's where we were displayed for them while we were presenting. um, and we were listening to that conversation, and they were saying, okay, so this year we probably need to put some tape on the floor because they have to stand 6 feet apart. And they're not allowed to sit across from each other on the lunch tables, and they're not allowed to sit beside each other. So, all right, preschool already puts a little marker down where their kids sit. So that teacher is saying, well, I'll just do that in the whole lunchroom. I'll do that for everybody. That way, the kids know where they're allowed to sit. So, thinking through that as a team, what do some of us already do that we can apply to this across the board? Or what do we need to do that none of us have had to do before? So, they took their matrix and they highlighted the things that could stay. And then they wrote down ideas of things that need to change. And then they were coming back together to rework that matrix, like similar to the example that I just showed you before. What was changing? What do we need to teach our kids that they don't already know? So again, I'm going to encourage you to, if you want to do this now, to pause it and work through this, or if this is something you want to come back to write this down, because I think this is going to be really beneficial as you're thinking through what you need your students to do in their new environment. And to switch gears just a little bit, we know the school-wide expectations are crucial to your PBIS program. It makes sure that things are done the same across the building, that everybody from the administrator to the teachers to service personnel knows what's going on and expected from our students. But through a classroom lens, we know that looks a lot different. Alicia and I taught together. She taught preschool, I taught second grade. I know our fifth grade teacher. All of those rooms had different expectations to a degree. We all followed being safe, respectful, and responsible. But what that looked like to my 7 and 8 year olds was different to 9 and 10 year olds in fifth grade. And, that's going to apply whether they're in kindergarten or seventh grade or 10th grade, that every classroom is going to have their own set of needs. So I'm going to encourage you to work through that back and forth of your students' learning environments, and making those expectations clear from the beginning. So part of the time, if you're in a hybrid model, they're going to be with you in the building, but then part of the time they're going to be working at home. So making them a part of that, and remembering that, Alicia did a great job of explaining how when your internal systems are overworked, your external systems need to be more secure. They're coming in, and they've probably, unless they're in preschool, have been in a classroom before, um, but they haven't been in a classroom with guidelines that are in place now. So, really being thoughtful and careful about how you're teaching and explaining that to your kids. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples here. The first one is for elementary school. Um, and a teacher that I was working with had this idea. She said, I think I need to let my kids help me make the expectations. I mean, we do that naturally as teachers. So why should it be any different now? So when they're in the classroom with you and you're able to explain things to them, okay, here's some areas of the room we're not allowed to go to together. Or when we get in line, this is what we have to do. So really being thoughtful, like I said, and thinking through that with your students and letting them be a part of that. So what are expectations you have specifically for your classroom? But then talking about what it needs to be like when they work online, because you need them to follow certain things even when they're not physically with you. So, what do you expect from them? Do you expect them to ask you for help if they're confused? Do you expect them to do something every day or by the end of the week? So, taking the time to work through that with your kids, and then letting this be such a part of your conversation every day, giving this to your families and your parents so they know what's expected of their students. They can prepare them for when they're in the building. They have language to talk to them when they're at home with them. And then doing a similar thing with your older students in middle and high school. The same idea is applying. When they're in the school building, what's expected of them in your classroom? What is expected from you when they're working online? And I really encourage you to work with your teams and to work with the other teachers in your building to create similar expectations so that everyone's on the same page. And again, even for the older kids, that parents have the language to support them while they're learning at home. So we're going to move into talking a little bit about acknowledgements and incentives. So we know for the expectations, if you want it, you must teach it. That's something that is ingrained into your culture if you're already a PBIS school. So now that you're switching gears and thinking about that through a hybrid lens and through a remote learning lens, or doing that online, we want to think about doing the same thing with acknowledgements and incentives. We know it's a huge part of your PBIS program to motivate our students to do the positive things that we want to see more of. But does this even work virtually? And the short answer of that is that yes, it does. You can use acknowledgement systems when your students are in a virtual learning environment. The first thing you're going to do is to remember to refer to your expectations, and that's why that piece is so important. When your students know what you want them to do, then you can acknowledge them when they do that. So you're going to provide them some behavior specific praise, just as you do in person, and you see what you want. A great way to do that is using the chat feature, or seeing if your software lets you add stickers or emojis or something like that to your praise. Um, Alicia had mentioned that I was teaching in the spring. So one of my expectations for my students was that you would finish all of your iReady minutes within the week. So when I saw that that was done, I would get on Schoology and I would send a quick message out and say, I see that all your iReady minutes are finished. Thank you for working so hard. And that was just a quick acknowledgement that, hey, I see you did what you needed to do. I could have left it alone and just put their grade in the computer, but I wanted them to feel good about accomplishing something that they knew I wanted them to do. And it motivated them to continue doing that week after week, because we know when our students are working virtually, it's really hard to maintain that motivation if we're not helping to build that with them. Something else is, I had a co-teacher for writing, and she and I would post comments and discussions every day. And our students would respond back with their pieces of the writing process. And we made sure that every time a student posted, we either commented back to them or simply liked their post, like you can do on Facebook. And the students caught on that we were doing this, and they started doing it to each other. And it was really cool to watch that community build, and that feedback and that acknowledgement build within each other. And they would comment, oh, I love your picture, or that's a great idea, or they would like or love each other's posts. So it really motivated them to keep doing it. And then seeing if there's some kind of software built into what you're using to increase the opportunities to respond, like I just talked about. So, when we opened up that discussion, they were able to comment back and forth on each other. So not only were the teachers acknowledging them, but their peers were acknowledging them as well. So some more ideas for virtual acknowledgments would be to greet your students when they log in, just like you do when they come into your classroom every day, greeting them by name and sharing a positive comment. Something I did in the spring was setting up team meetings for us to just have a little classroom chat and a classroom meeting. And some of them joined, some of them didn't. I understand that's completely out of your control to an extent. But that time was so beneficial to them to have that interaction with their teacher, for me to have it with them, and for them to have it with each other. And it was a great time for me to talk to them about their work. So not only was it helping them with their social and emotional needs to see their friends and to talk to their friends, but also to check in with them academically, to give them those acknowledgments like, oh, I can tell you've been working so hard this week and you got done early. You must have really been working extra hard at home. And they love to talk about that with each other and to share those experiences. And it gave them a chance to ask questions. And then if there's an app you're using, I used Class Dojo last year, and it allows immediate acknowledgement. So I set up my points on there to acknowledge the things I wanted virtually. So if you're using something like that, setting that up to meet the environments that your students are working in. And some more ideas is acknowledging them for being on time if you're doing a live lesson, participating in online discussions and submitting their work on time, working hard on assignments. Like I said, if you have something, similar to Class Dojo, you can instantly give those points. If you don't, you can comment to them on the platform that you're using. Just a quick little message that says, thanks for turning in your work, or you worked really hard on that assignment, keep it up. Just to, they're so used to that feedback from us in person, it comes really naturally to teachers to give that often to their students. So remembering that even though they're not in front of you, they still need that. They still need that motivation to keep going. So that leads into that conversation about incentives. So you've set up expectations. Your students know what you expect of them. You're acknowledging them when you see it, because when you acknowledge what you see, we know that that grows. They're more motivated to continue engaging in those positive behaviors. But are they working towards something? This is a chance that you get to be creative and have fun. And teachers are really, really great at this. You guys do a wonderful job of this in your classrooms, but it can also be done online. It gets a little bit trickier because you're going to need a system in place to do this, but it's definitely doable. In the spring, like I said, we used Class Dojo, so our students were getting points, and we had a menu of things that they could choose from when they earned a certain point goal. So things like digital coupons, or one of mine was that they would get mail from the teacher. And that was something they loved more than anything, because it's not really common in the world we're living in today. So to get a postcard from their teacher, or an award that got sent in the mail or something, letting them do show and tell, or a video that they post to the class, setting goals for the students and the classes, or even doing a lottery style drawing, which I'll show you an example of here shortly, where the more times you're acknowledged, the more chances you have to win a prize. And all of these things are things that Alicia and I have done a little bit of research on, or done actually ourselves. So if you need some more ideas, or some more specific information, feel free to let us know and we can send some things your way. But I will show you a couple examples of that. So this was something that we found online for some virtual incentives for students. So, describing that reward and what you would get, or if you are using points, how many point for every so many points, these are some things you can earn. A lot of these you can do with your students. What are some things you would like to do? Would you like a video message from your teacher? Would you like to make a video that all of your class gets to see? Would you like me to send you something in the mail as a little surprise? And that can be something as simple as, like I said, a postcard, or printing off a certificate for them that they get. So getting them involved in things that will incentivize them to keep working and to work for those acknowledgments. And then this is an awesome example from a teacher in Harrison County, where they were using iReady. It was required of the students. There were so many minutes they had to complete within a week, and then they were looking at their pass rate for lessons. So she integrated this into her virtual learning platform. And as they worked through iReady, they got to receive certain rewards for that work. So she talked through her class with this. They had a class discussion. They talked about it. What do you want to work for? And then she posted this and sent it out to the parents. So they were more motivated to work hard on iReady when they knew that there was a possibility at the end of it. They got that acknowledgement and that incentive for it. So some other ideas that I'll show you here in just a second. We talked about, if you're doing tickets or points, posting winners on social media, or highlighting students for working hard. They're no different than us, and they love that acknowledgement where other people can see it. I don't know if any of you do shout outs at your school, but that's a great in-person incentive where, if you catch them doing something, their name is read over the intercom. And that really motivates that 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 feeds that intrinsic motivation for them. They'd rather have their name read aloud on something they did than getting something physical. So finding ways to do that virtually. Like I said, if you are using something that gives points, to update that for their environment. So what do you expect from them online? And then offering just some fun competitions. We did some STEAM activities where I taught in the spring, and the students got to engage in those competitions and post their results, and they got feedback from the teachers in the building. And it was something that was really cool and motivated them. It didn't take anything on our part other than sending out that competition, that directive to them, and then they got to be creative at home with their families. So this is an example on the left of a lottery style incentive. So this was a school that was doing iReady, and it was the end of the year diagnostic. And if any of you use iReady, you know how one, important that is, but two, how difficult it was to motivate students to do well on that when they weren't with you. It's hard enough when they are with you to keep them engaged in it, to make sure they're on task, to make sure they're taking their time, to make sure they're working their hardest. So we wanted to motivate them to do those things at home. So we gave them chances. There were certain things that if they did, they got their name put in for a drawing. Finishing their work, taking their time, if we saw that they didn't rush, if they increased in their points. And then our principal or the principal and the academic support teacher went on Facebook Live and they drew students' names out for gift cards. And this was something they were really excited about. They loved logging in and seeing people live was just a huge thing for them. But also knowing that something they already had to do. They already had to do already. So the possibility of that hard work paying off was really exciting to them. And then another thing on the right is a little screenshot of a student shout out for the week. So at this school, the parents would send in pictures of their students doing work. So you can see there was a STEM activity that was given out. They did this when there was Earth Day activities to do, or simply just their writing project for the week. They would send in pictures and then the teachers would send those into the technology contact and they would post the student pictures and a little blurb about what they were doing. And they loved seeing those online. And the parents were really eager to send those in because their kids were really excited to show off the work they were doing. They're not getting that interaction between their peers. They're not getting that feedback in person from the people telling them, oh, that's so great. I love what you did. That was a really good job. So the next best thing was to do that through pictures and do that in a virtual world. And it was really successful for those students. So I want you to take a moment to think through this through the context of your school. I'm going to explain this and then I'm going to encourage you to pause this and work through this either by yourself or with your team or with another coworker. And this is a document that we're going to send to you with this presentation. So just take a few minutes to think through this. And at the top, you'll see a green box that says student expectations at school. So what are the expectations that you have for them in your classroom? And on the top right, you'll see a blue box that says ways to acknowledge at school, and then an orange box with incentives to offer at school. So when they're meeting your expectations, how will you acknowledge that? Do you use points on Class Dojo? Do you have tickets that you give out? Do you have tokens that they get? So what is your acknowledgement system that you're going to use in the building? And then what incentives can you offer them? Is there a classroom goal? Is there a student prize box that they're getting? Are they getting coupons? What are they working towards for those acknowledgments? And then switch gears at the bottom and you're going to follow all of those same steps for when they're working online. So what are those expectations? How can you acknowledge them for working online? And then what incentives can you offer? And this is a great tool that we found for other schools to really think through that. Especially in this hybrid model through both settings, and really kind of get your gears turning of how you can blend what you're doing. And as Alicia said, too much of a good thing can be too much sometimes. So how can you make this work easily for you? Because the easier it is and the more streamlined, the more likely you are to follow it. So how can you kind of tie these things together in a way that makes sense for you so you can keep this going with your students, regardless of where they are, whether they're with you or whether they're at home? As we talk more about the new normal for education right now, one thing to keep in mind is supporting students and their families. The first thing I'd like you to do is to reflect on the reentry practices that Alicia talked about a little bit ago. So think about what you already have in place, what your next steps are going to be before you see your students or before you see them again, and then what steps are going to come after that as the next few weeks roll out for you. And to consider that maybe your families and students need things like a sample schedule for the week or a checklist for when their work is due, a printer page, a planner page if they don't have an agenda or a planner available to them, and then some guidance in building routines and expectations at home. So I'm going to dig into these a little bit over the next few slides and give you some examples of what that might look like. This is something I made for my students when I was teaching virtually last spring. So it's simply a checklist for the work that was due for them in Schoology over a week's time. You can see there that it's separated by day of the week as it was assigned, but it's also separated by the subject. So this allowed them to either do their work for each day, or maybe they wanted to do all of their reading on Monday, all of their I Ready on Tuesday, spelling on Wednesday. So it gave them some flexibility in how they split up their work at home for their kids. It was also important because I know as an adult taking online college classes, logging into that platform can be overwhelming to me, even if I kind of already know what I'm looking at. So, for my kids and for their families to get into something new that they hadn't done before seemed to overwhelm them, even though directions were given of where to find your assignments and where they were posted. This just made it a little bit easier and concrete for them to know exactly what to look for and exactly what was expected to find. And I got a lot of positive feedback from them on this. And something that Alicia and I talked about as parents of students who are working virtually, but also as educators, because we've both been in a classroom for a long time, was that parent we struggled at home. I struggled with my stepson. I know she struggled with her son. As far as this new idea of learning at home. And even though we had our own background in education, to know that we were struggling with how to move forward with our kids at home, it helped me to realize that my families were probably also feeling the same way. If they don't have a background in education, then they might not have their minds wrapped around this in the same way. And that's in no way a criticism to them at all. If I did someone else's job, I would have no clue what I was doing. I wouldn't understand the language that they were using. So just to keep in mind that for our families, especially parents who aren't for fellow educators, um, they may not be able to wrap their heads around this in the same way that you are. So to making it concrete and clear to them is really going to help things run smoothly at home. And here's some examples of how we share this with our families. So I'll be honest, this is the Facebook page from the school I was working at, and Alicia's son goes there. So I did use our responses as an example because I know neither one of us minded that. But there was another teacher there who had a child at a different school, and she felt the same way. She was like, "Okay, we're logging into Schoology here. I'm using Schoology as a teacher, so I know how it works and how it looks, and I'm struggling a little bit to help him organize and find his work." So you can see on the bottom left there, she took all of his work for the week and she put it into a chart for him. And she put it on the refrigerator and she organized it that way. So then she got on our school's Facebook page and made a post like, "Hey, I'm a mom, I'm a teacher, but I'm struggling a little bit right now. So I thought I'd share my idea with you. Is anyone else feeling the same way? Does anyone else have any ideas for how they're handling this?" So you can see there how Alicia commented how she was doing at home. I commented with what I was doing with my kid, and we had a lot of parents jump in on that. And it was really awesome. It helped to validate what we were feeling, but it also definitely helped our parents to validate what they were feeling because they jumped in and said, "Oh, yeah, I'm having the same issue. I had to write it out in a list or I made a schedule." And it was a really great chance to build that community in our school and to help everyone remember that they were in this together. And to get those ideas from each other was really a cool experience. And another thing we did was make a series of videos to help teach parents really how to do PBIS at home. Like I said, our parents that aren't teachers and even the ones that are might struggle in these moments of how to set these experiences up in a positive way at home. So we did a series of 4 videos, one each week, to teach families how to help their kids. So it talked about building a routine and setting up expectations, how to acknowledge your children, incentives to offer that were low cost, no cost. So really mirroring the PBIS program we had at school and shifting that focus into how parents could do it with their kids at home. And this was something that was really, really valuable. So I'm going to encourage you to to get creative and think of ways you can do this. How can you share what you're doing at school with your families? How can you help them build this in their own houses? So that transition of being at school and then working at home is a lot smoother for our kids as they move back and forth in this hybrid model of learning. And I know that when we send this out to you, there's going to be a document that has a link to this video specifically, so that you can see one of them and kind of what that idea was and how we shared that information. And as we wrap up, I just want you to remember that coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. We're all in a new world, even though we did virtual teaching last spring. Now that you're moving into a hybrid model of teaching and you have your students some days and you don't have them other, that's a whole different ballgame of keeping that consistency and really getting things in place for them as they switch back and forth through environments. So just remember to take it one step at a time. Give yourself some grace as you're doing it. And remember that Alicia and I are both here for you to support you and help you in any way that we can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Erin. We just wanted to show you our email addresses and encourage you to reach out to us. We love nothing more than supporting school teams and supporting schools. So if there's any of this that you'd like to talk more about, or if you have an idea that you'd like some support, we are more than happy to support you in any way possible. I think that this quote is has led my life for the last several years, but I think it's really essential to educators right now. We're going to do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, you do better. And I realized that having access to this video, a lot of you have already had kids in your door or in your remote classroom. So I encourage you to even take what we talked about here. If it's not what you started with, but you think some of it is a good idea, when you know better, you can do better. And we encourage you to take that and use that as your mantra for this year. We hope you have a safe and healthy and positive outcome filled year, and we can't wait to we can be with you in person, or we can meet with you in Zoom or Teams. So we hope you have a wonderful week, a wonderful year, and please reach out to us if you need us. Thank you.